January 2026. Paris, France. Deep beneath the city, inside one of the most fortified underground vaults on Earth, a place known only as La Souterraine, the final delivery arrives. 129 tons of gold. Every bar stamped. Every ounce accounted for. France has just completed the quiet withdrawal of its entire gold reserve from the vaults of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. The operation took 6 months. 26 separate transactions, structured deliberately to avoid attention, structured deliberately to avoid panic. America's oldest ally, the nation that helped birth the United States, had just decided it no longer trusted Washington with its money. The French government said it was a routine financial housekeeping exercise, a technical compliance matter. Nothing political, nothing to see. But here is the question that nobody in the mainstream press asked. If it was nothing, why the secrecy? Why 26 transactions spread across 6 months? And why does this story echo, almost perfectly, the last time France pulled its gold from New York? A move that ended the entire global financial order as we knew it. This is not a story about gold. This is a story about trust. And right now, trust in the American dollar, the bedrock of the entire global economy, is cracking. And the United States itself is swinging the hammer. To understand what is happening in 2026, we need to go back to 1944. At the end of World War II, 44 nations gathered in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, and made a deal that would shape the next 80 years of history. The dollar would be the world's reserve currency. Every nation would peg their money to the dollar, and the dollar in turn would be backed by gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. America held the gold. The world held dollars. Everybody trusted the system. Then came Charles de Gaulle. In February 1965, the French president stood before the world's press and called the system a fraud. America, he said, was printing more dollars than it had gold to back. The United States was, in his words, exporting its own inflation onto the world. De Gaulle did not just talk, he acted. Between 1963 and 1966, France secretly repatriated over 3,300 tons of gold from the Federal Reserve, an operation codenamed Vide-Gousset, which roughly translates as empty the pocket. It took 44 boat trips and 129 flights to bring the metal home. France was right. 6 years later, on August 15, 1971, President Nixon went on national television and did the unthinkable. He severed the dollar from gold entirely. Bretton Woods was dead. The world moved to pure fiat money, paper backed not by metal, but by faith in the United States. Until Washington decided to use the dollar as a weapon. Act 3, The Threat, the Power Move. February 24, 2022. Russia invades Ukraine. Within days, the United States, the European Union, and their allies respond with the most sweeping financial sanctions in modern history. Approximately $300 billion in Russian central bank assets held in Western financial institutions are frozen overnight. Russian banks are cut off from SWIFT, the global financial messaging system that underpins international transactions. Russia's economy is intended to collapse. The ruble is intended to crumble. The message from Washington is unmistakable. Cross us, and we will erase your money from existence. The sanctions cause genuine pain inside Russia. But something else happens. Something Washington did not fully anticipate. Every finance minister, every central bank governor, every sovereign wealth fund manager on Earth watches what happens to $300 billion and draws the same cold conclusion. If it can happen to Russia, it can happen to anyone. This was not an accident. The timing was not a coincidence. The weaponization of the dollar changes the calculation for every nation on Earth, friend and foe alike. Act 4. Reaction and escalation, 15%. The first to act visibly is Russia itself. Moscow begins aggressively converting dollar reserves into gold, assets that cannot be frozen because they are held physically on Russian soil. By late 2025, Russia's domestic gold position has grown by over $200 billion since the sanctions began. But Russia is not alone. Not even close. The IMF's own data, published in 2026, confirms that the dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves has fallen to 56.8%. That is the lowest figure since 1994. At its peak in 2001, the dollar represented 72% of global reserves. Central banks globally purchase over 1,000 tons of gold annually in 2022, 2023, and 2024. The longest sustained buying streak in modern recorded history. China accelerates its alternative to SWIFT. By March 2026, China's cross-border interbank payment system, CIPS, processes approximately $270 billion in a single month. It now connects over 1,500 institutions across 117 countries. India and the UAE sign agreements to settle oil trade in rupees and dirhams, bypassing the dollar entirely. And then France moves its gold home, quietly, methodically, profitably, booking a €13 billion capital gain in the process. But what the French government did not say publicly, what no Western leader will say on the record, is that this is about something far deeper than accounting. Act 5. The hidden angle. What they're not telling you. 15%. Here is what the financial press largely missed. France's repatriation in 2026 mirrors its repatriation in the 1960s with almost surgical precision. Same logic, same secrecy. And last time, it helped bring down a global financial order. But there is a more uncomfortable truth hidden in this story. The experts most loudly warning about dollar weaponization are not Russian propagandists. They are American institutions. The Atlantic Council, a Washington-based think tank, published analysis in 2026, warning that overuse of financial sanctions is eroding the dollar's primacy. Not theoretically, actually. The Peterson Institute for International Economics has documented how each new round of sanctions accelerates the construction of dollar alternatives. In other words, the weapon Washington is using to punish its enemies is simultaneously teaching those enemies and its allies how to build an exit door from the dollar system. The beneficiaries of this shift are clear. China's CIPS payment network gains credibility every time SWIFT is weaponized. Gold, which no government controls, becomes the safe haven reserve asset of choice. Roughly 40% of global GDP quietly accelerate the financial infrastructure that makes dollar alternatives viable. This was not an accident. The paradox is documented. The warnings were on the table, and the dollar erosion is accelerating regardless. Act 6. Stakes and what happens next. 10 to 15%. The dollar is not collapsing. Let us be precise about that. It remains the dominant global reserve currency. No single alternative, not the yuan, not gold, not CIPS, can replace it overnight. But the trajectory matters. From 72% in 2001 to 57% today. A 15-point decline over 25 years. Slow by any single year's measure. Enormous in its accumulated effect. History offers a precise precedent. The British pound sterling was once what the dollar is today. The world's unquestioned reserve currency, backed by the largest empire on earth. Between 1914 and 1956, it lost that status. Not in a single crash. In a long, slow, structurally inevitable erosion.